Hey guys, Darren Kelly, Coach of Wise Pods, and welcome back to another episode of Team Review post round 10. And what a weird round it was. Definitely didn't sort of pan out the way I sort of thought it would, with a lot of huge scores, which we did see, but not as many as probably expected. So, probably just a mediocre round in the end. But the big boys in the middle, got it done with some massive scores in there. Uh, and I guess that's probably where I'll start. Luckily, I did have the VC on Cherry in the end. I did just back him in. Got a little bit cold feet with Sheasel, with all the rumours that he was spending a bit more time forward. Didn't know if the ball was really going to be there around him, so did end up ultimately making that switch between Sheasel and Cherry, and luckily it did pay off with a big 155 from the X-Man. He is back, and he is absolutely firing. And yeah, good to see him get it done in a big matchup. Probably wasn't the nice matchup that we sort of expected. I think it played into his favour a fair bit with the super high contested game. Obviously 51 hitouts. I think Nankervis already almost had 50 hitouts as well. So it was just a super contested game. A stupid amount of tackles. They were just tackling each other for fun. Um, I lost count how many times Cherry tried to take it out of the ruck and couldn't dispose of it quick enough before Nankervis grabbed him. So would have been nice if he could get the hands off just a little bit extra, just in time to get those points. But it is what it is. You can't complain about a 155 too much at all. I will say though, it seemed like they were giving his tackles to a lot of his teammates. It's always a bit of a confusing one when two players tackle one player. It's like, oh, who has precedence of who gets the actual tackle numbers? I know sometimes they give it to both players, but sometimes they only give it to the one. So he just seemed to get on the wrong end of that a few times. But like I said, 155, you definitely cannot complain about him there. And I guess the other ruckman that also dominated is obviously the likes of Royal Marshall. He was obviously a huge pickup for anyone that jumped on him with the TDK outs. He's just, yeah, he looks like he's fit and firing now. Awesome matchup. He was just absolutely flying. I think he was on like 64 at like quarter time, which is just a ridiculous stat. Didn't quite break the ton at the half time, but yeah, he was just on track for a monster and was the highest scorer of the round. And yeah, looks like an amazing pick so far. And yeah, you'd be super happy if you picked him up. And it starts to raise a few eyebrows with us Gorn owners. What are we doing with him at some stage? Do we need to jump on a Royal Marshall? Why he is cheap? I know Maxi is flying at the moment. He's just been ticking along over the last 6 weeks. Had some pretty good scores in there, so no concern to be raised just yet. But with some tougher matchups in the future, particularly after the bye, do we need to start looking at that transition of, okay, do we need to jump off Gorney at the round 15 bye and jump on a Royal Marshall while he's still relatively cheap at that stage? I know it's still 4 weeks away, but he could still be priced around that $1.1 million at that price, and for what we know he can do, yeah, he's definitely someone that we could look at jumping on if his run starts to open up a fair bit. Which, looking at post round 15, it's not amazing, but not the worst either. So yeah, definitely something to ponder. But at this point of stage, I don't think there's any point in questioning it, and there's no point jumping off. They're both going to be here or thereabouts, and I also think Royal Marshall will come back to earth a little bit in the next couple matchups. Big Witsy's the hardest matchup in the league at the moment, so expecting a low ton there again with Royal Marshall, and then obviously Max Gorn. We know he's just a bully, so yeah, expecting two lower scores heading into his bye. So yeah, probably temper your expectations as a Marshall owner for the next couple of weeks, and don't get too worried about what's happening. So, but yeah, awesome reward for those that jumped on. But more back to my team before jumping into that. So I scored a 21.03, which was a bit strange. I thought I wasn't in a too bad position, all weekend. I wasn't having too many lackluster scores. Obviously, the Horn Francis sort of put a damper on a few things with him being subbed out so early with that hamstring, and obviously a forced trade, so that is a bit unfortunate. But because he was so highly owned, he's over 50%, or he was over 50% in the whole competition. I was like, oh, surely it doesn't hurt me too much. But I think the guys that just didn't have him, or the coaches should say that didn't have him, obviously had a massive round. So yeah, I think that's why my round ranking is quite high. But ultimately, my defense has let me down. Somehow Zach Reed's carrying the back line there with that 82. Everyone else is, in the 70s, if not sub 70s, which is a little bit disappointing. I cannot pick for the life of me between these rookies. I went trainer. As I said, I was going to back him in to be my sort of rookie on field, and obviously Lindsay put up a very nice score. So I just cannot pick him this year. Just very unfortunate and quite frustrating, to be honest. It would be nice to be able to loop, but there's so many players in and out. It's very hard to try and establish at this point in time. But +3, -3. I should say my ranking also dropped about another 1,500 spots. So poor again. Need to improve. Need to start moving forward. Hopefully the buyers can uh, shoot me up a fair bit as I'm planning quite heavily for them. But we'll see how things play out. Like I said, I think the buys aren't going to be too difficult this year, so we'll see how that sort of plays out. But quickly, my +3 and -3 has to go to +3 has to go to Cherry. 155, second highest scorer of the round, and with the VC on him, you can't go past him. He's just an absolute monster at the moment. -3, probably Dunkley. I had the highest expectation for him in a nice matchup against Melbourne and really just didn't get amongst it. He just got burnt a fair few times. Minimal tackles, which is disappointing. Yeah, didn't hit the scoreboard. Not really getting too many marks. Just yeah, ultimately a 94. I can't complain too much, but for a matchup that he has historically been massive at, I said he went 128 and like 150 last year against them, something like that. So yeah, I was expecting some pretty good scores from him. Yeah, in order to make the weekend just a little bit better, but yeah, 94 is disappointing. So I'll give it to him. Especially when I only traded him in 2 weeks ago, and he's put up a 110 and a 94, just averaging tick over 100 there when I paid a bit more than that. So I want to see a bit more of a performance from him. So hopefully he can do that in the next couple of weeks as he leads up to his bye. But quickly reviewing my trades from last week. So they did change a little bit from my video. Obviously, Huswaite was always going with him being dropped, and Jaden Short, we got that sort of late notice on Friday that he was going to be laid out. So that had to make that shift to jumping off him. So that sort of locked in my 2 forced trades essentially. And what that allowed me to do, instead of going to the likes of Holmes, I could get up to Nick Martin, which I was still tossing up between Nick Martin and Sinclair. Ultimately, I got it wrong in the end. So, Sinclair went, 130 or something like that. Something ridiculous. Let's have a look. Nearly 140. Yeah, 139. So he was the obvious pick that we should have all jumped on. And I was very close to pulling the trigger, but I just felt I could get Nick Martin. I know he didn't have the best matchup against the Doggies. Obviously, Doggies are pretty tough. But I just thought I really want him for this week. So if all else fails, then I have him for this week. And he went up a little bit in coin as well. So got him while he was under $1 million. So I guess that was still a win in the end, but probably not as good as what a Sinclair was going to be last week. So can't complain, but ultimately happy with Nick Martin. And that meant I didn't have much money to really do a huge amount else. So I jumped on Kitty Coleman as a bit of a risky mid-pricer pick. Ultimately, I said I was pretty comfortable with him. Just with his price range, we obviously knew that he's going to be outperform what he was priced at, because we've seen historically that he's always been this sort of 70 to 80 guy, and I do believe he can push closer to that 80, if not 90, back there. So yeah, so I was happy to jump on him first round, and he scored the 73, so I'm not too terrible at that. Obviously had the lower time on ground with sub 70%, got managed a fair bit with, I think, 2 stints on the bench each quarter. So expecting that to slowly improve as he gets more and more into the game with a bit more match fitness under his belt. So yeah, I'm expecting that to improve. So hopefully that means he can push 85 in the next couple of weeks. But that was a pretty good matchup against Melbourne there. Obviously they are very friendly for designated kick-out players, which I should say he also took a fair few kick-ins. So that was also nice to see. But yeah, he's a huge target for those that don't have him. I know there's a couple of forced trades, so maybe people can't jump on him, but he could be an alternative for like a 1-up, 1-down scenario if you're one of those lucky people that don't have him, don't have 2 forced trade like myself. Breaking to 43, like I said, he'll go up in coin a fair bit. Round 16 bye. as a defender is pretty decent. I know a few people already have, the likes of Nick Martin and Holmes potentially, but the buys are still 5 weeks away, so Kitty Coleman could make 200k in that 5 weeks, and then could be switched out from that point onwards if he doesn't uh, continue and potentially be a premium for us. Who knows? Yeah, he could still jump off him then. Even then, you've only got two back there, so I wouldn't be too concerned there. So ultimately, pretty happy with my trades. Obviously, with two red dots going to two green dots, and both performing as expected. So not too bad there. But ultimately, just quickly going through my player by player. So Wanganeen-Milera, I'll start with the bench. Sorry, the back line. Wanganeen-Milera was a bit disappointing. Started well, but caught a bit of an injury. So we've got a bit of a watch on him, whether he's going to be good to go for the weekend. I think he will be. Just have to watch and see that one. He was playing midfield, so obviously just changing his role every single week, which is a bit frustrating, but sometimes it does lead to him to score well, but unfortunately not on the weekend against the Eagles, which is a little bit disappointing. Didn't allow him to get the marks back there. Looks like Sinclair took a lot of them instead. So yeah, disappointing for him for the 76, but he'll bounce back. Roberts 73, again disappointing, but does come into a nice matchup, so I'm not really worried about him at all. Similar with Bice, I said last week, if you trade him out last week, then yeah, it's not a bad move. But if you held him, then it's probably just worth holding him for now until he's buy, unless like things change in the team and obviously he moves forward or whatever. So I'm in the camp now. You hold him through the buy. He's got the best matchup for defenders, and obviously Richmond there as well. So he should go decently. So fingers crossed that does come true for me, and for those that did hold, because he did drop a little bit in coin. I don't think it was much, 13k. Break even at 81 though, so hopefully you can hit that and reduce how much cash you'll be dropping. Zach Reid just getting it done and quietly is challenging to be the highest price change all season. Bailey Smith I think is 30k in front of him, but yeah, he's definitely putting up those numbers to beat him in that one. So yeah, definitely going to be probably the cash cow of the year if he can continue. Break even with 36, still making a huge amount of coin. Up against Richmond this weekend will be interesting. Obviously, he loves just a lot of that chip mark around the halfback, so whether they are able to do that or not will be interesting. With if depending on which Tigers show up, right? If they're competitive or not. So, yeah, he's holding up my defensive line. Trainer 50, disappointing. Got subbed out late in that fourth, or early in that fourth, I should say. Uh, didn't get the marks that I was expecting, particularly with Jaden Shaw out. I thought he would go well or at least improve slightly, but just didn't really get amongst it. It was a pretty tight and contested game, like as I said, so it really wasn't a matchup for those halfbackers or any any position really other than those inside mids. So yeah, I think that was truly a matchup, and he should be fine. I'll back him in again this week against Essendon. Should be fine there. Already spoke about Kitty Coleman, he'll be fine. Finn O'Sullivan with just another 46. He was on like 31 at like halfway through the second and just finds a way not to hit plus 50 is just astonishing. It's very frustrating, and for what he could be in what the role he's playing is just so annoying. But yeah, I'll be glad to see him going hopefully next week. Fingers crossed nothing happens and he can get out of my team. Fingers crossed that happens. Already spoke about Dunkley, but yeah, hopefully bounce back. Jordan Dawson was great. 138 was a great VC option if anyone went there early. Probably a huge target for people that don't have him coming up against the likes of West Coast Eagles. Definitely could go pretty big in this one. Whether he spends time in the midfield or at forward, it doesn't really matter. He should get the job done. So he is pretty safe there. The run isn't the best, some pretty tough matchups with Sydney, the Lions and Hawks before the bye, but the round 15 bye is not too bad. But you probably already have day costs there, so just be mindful of not loading up too heavy there. But the bye after the bye is obviously phenomenal with Richmond and Melbourne. Western Bulldogs tougher, Gold Coast is alright, and then yeah, not too bad of a run home. So yeah, I definitely would recommend him if you can pay up for him. He's a bit more of an expensive player, but yeah, he's someone that you want. He's the number one midfielder at the moment, so you can have that. Nick Dacos, 88, disappointing as well. Did cop a little bit of attention, but ultimately nothing amazing. He should have been better than that. Didn't tackle nearly as hard. So 3 poor scores again. Up against North this week. Will he cop much attention? Hard to sort of say whether they put someone on him, but I'm doubtful. So fingers crossed he goes okay there. Sheasel, like I said, was pretty disappointing in a nice matchup, playing more as a half forward than anything. Had a few CBAs, but more half forward and just floating around wherever. Good to see that he got plenty of tackles, obviously working in the stoppages around the ground, but yeah, ultimately didn't get the disposals that we were sort of looking for from him, and didn't get nearly any marks in the grand game because it, again, was very contested. So disappointing from him, and I guess it's just going to be a bit of a watch and see with him whether what role he's going to play each and every week, because yeah, he's going to be flicked around back and forth depending on the matchup, right? So a little bit disappointing there to see. I would rather him halfback, but it is what it is. Rosie with 103 got the job done. Just continued to hit the low tons, so I'm happy with him there. I guess not much more input there. I didn't actually watch that game at all. I was out that night. Marek is now finally over the decent run he had. You know, these are the 3 matchups that I sort of flagged that I would definitely be holding him for. Now he's starting to come into a bit of an interesting patch. You know, some decent, some not. So it'll be interesting to see how he goes through this patch and whether he might be a sort of a trade in the coming weeks. But fingers crossed we can hold him through the next 4 and he gets him to his bye. That would be the ideal scenario, but we'll see how he sort of holds up. Break even to 64, so he's definitely not someone that needs to go this week. But if he does drop a lower 70, then he may be someone on the cards very shortly. Still taking plenty of kick-ins back there, so the role was very secure and seems like it's going to be consistent. But we'll have to wait and see on that one. Levi Ashcroft's still just kicking along. I'm glad to still have him. Decent points, and yeah, it's just getting the job done. So glad he's still kicking along, making some coin. Ned Long is starting to get a bit of a worry. Obviously, 2 sub 80 scores in the last 2 weeks. Again, time on ground is a bit lower than what I'd like. And yeah, there's always that concern of does he get subbed and get a bit of rest at some stage with some of the other big boys in there. But yeah, he's still just getting the job done at the moment. Not making any coin, you know. 11k isn't much to speak about, but yeah, hopefully he can get through to his bye as well with North and Melbourne in the next 2. Next 3. Hawthorn in the middle there as well. So tougher, but yeah, we'll see how he goes. Moraes was a surprise package over the weekend. You know, I was like, oh, he's sub again. He's gonna drop another 50k with a sub 30 score. But luckily, well, unluckily, Port had some injury concerns with Sin and obviously Horn Francis, who I'll speak about in a second. And meant to come on and actually did quite well to score some points out in the wing there. So yeah, good to see him put up some decent scores and actually made some coin this week and made his break even a bit lower. And fingers crossed this means he can break back into that side actually showing something. So yeah, fingers crossed that's good news for him. So yeah, he may survive. And I was probably looking at trading him next week anyway, but yeah, I just really wanted to say that he was good. It was good to see him maintain his price range at this point. So fingers crossed for next week. He can do it one more week. The ruck lineup I already touched on. Max was probably a little bit underwhelming for what I expected against Darcy Fort. I did sort of make a bit of a shuffle in my captains when I saw that McInerney was laid out. I thought Max Corn's gone massive here, like Cherry, but just didn't ultimately get it done. 46 headouts is great, but yeah, no tackles, which is always Max Corn sort of the way he rucks. He doesn't do a huge of that tackle pressure, so it is. It's 117. Can't complain too much there. The forward line pretty up and down. You know, Bailey Smith got it done again with 120. He just super consistent. Probably is going to be a pretty good VC option this week, I would say, again, on Thursday night. So stay tuned for that. Even though it is Western Bulldogs, it is obviously the revenge game. So yeah, expecting him to have a fair good game there. But I wouldn't be surprised to see if the Dogs put a bit of attention into him. Just Bevo being Bevo, you know, so we'll wait and see on that one. But yeah, he's just killing it at the moment. Spoke about Nick Martin, obviously a huge target for anyone that doesn't have him. Probably my number one trade-in target this week, if you can, especially with all the midfield, forward premiums that we have to trade out in Jack Macrae and Horn Francis. Obviously, Horn Francis with that hamstring, and Jack Macrae now out for an extended period of time with a punctured lung. I haven't had confirmation of how long that's going to be, but I've heard whispers of 6 to 8 weeks. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. But either way, I don't think any of them are holds. Horn Francis is probably a month at least with a decent hamstring. If you hear anything less, then just remind yourself of what happened with Connor Rosie last year, where he was a 1 week hamstring and ended up being a 3 week after that. So just remind yourself of that if you hear anything shorter than him. So I think both of these are forced traded out, which is unfortunate. Means we're very limited to our trades, and it means Caleb Daniel survives again, even though he had a decent 77. Expected him to hit an 80, and that's about what he did. Just no marks. He gets burnt so badly by his teammates, where he's just sitting in the pocket, calling for the ball, and they just don't trust him enough. But they trust him to take kick-ins. It just doesn't make any sense in my head. So, but it is what it is. But that's pretty much the team. Cloesy, sorry, last one. Would ideally would go as well. If I didn't have forced trades, he'd be the one that goes down, and I would be grabbing the likes of Cooper Simpson. So for those that don't have 2 forced trades out, I think Cooper Simpson is a huge priority this week, just with probably being one of the last rookies that you could grab. And huge negative 9 break even, 313k isn't too much to pay. The round 13 buy is also pretty handy. You could hold him through, and fingers crossed he holds his spot after that. Is always a bit of a question mark, but yeah. That is the team, and another underwhelming week of fantasy for myself. Again, trying to improve as best I can. But what are we looking at doing this week? I have already made my trade just to make it a bit easier on the eye, but pretty much, if I want to show my trades, I don't know why it doesn't show it down the bottom there. But anyways, I obviously have traded out the 2 guys that's need to go in Jack Macrae and Horn Francis, and that only really left me enough money to sort of get to these 2 premiums. Now, I don't absolutely hate it, but I'm not absolutely in love with it as well. I've got 45k in the bank. Ideally, I would like to pick up Sinclair. I am a little bit light now in round 13 by specifically, now that the likes of Macrae is gone. I only have Nasai Wanganeen-Malira, where a lot of other people, have your Brayshaws in the midfield there. So I would like to cover that off with a Sinclair in the midfield, but I don't have the 50k to get up to him, unfortunately. I think I miss out by about 15k or something like that. 13k, so that's a bit unfortunate, but that would probably be my ideal trades. Warner and Sinclair, I think both of them can be top 6 for now. With these 2 guys out, Warner for sure slots into that top 6 mix. Decent run, making some coin at the moment. Obviously had that 116 on the weekend, so he went particularly well. Decent run with obviously Melbourne and then Richmond in the next 3. Round 14 buy is also quite handy. I have said for the last couple of weeks that I'm pretty light with premiums in the round 14, only really having Dacos, and I guess you could include a Roberts in there if you're brave enough, but I'm still not quite sure with him just yet. So really only having the 1 premium in there, and obviously a Warner can slot into that forward line for that week, so don't mind him there. But it's really just the run after the bye is a bit tricky, especially these 2 matchups, 2nd and 3rd or something like that. The hardest matchups for midfielders, so it'd be interesting. The other concern I do have is obviously Mills around the corner. How does that affect his role? Does he spend more time forward? It's a risk I'm just gonna have to take this week, I think, just with the way my team is structured up and the money I had available. I have looked at a few other potential options. A lot of people were playing around with a Peatling last week, so he went okay with a 77. CBAs were down on the weekend though, so that's a bit of a worrisome. A Bergman with a 79 wasn't amazing. The role was there in the first half, and that's when he was scoring quite well, but then he dropped off in the second half, which is a bit disappointing. Whether that's just going to continue, with obviously Port being smashed on the weekend. Do they continue with the experiment of him being in the midfield, or do they just go, nah, fuck it, we'll go back to what we know and try and get something out of this season? Who knows? It's always a bit sketchy with trading in players that are from teams that are getting absolutely destroyed at the moment. So there's a few things going on there. Plus the round 12 bye. While I'm not super heavy in that anymore with the likes of Horn Francis leaving and Daniel probably leaving next week, only having the 3 premiums, it's uh, definitely something that I could look at potentially, but probably not in reality. So there is that. Obviously, Philippou was another option that a lot of people were looking at. Just had the 50, which is disappointing. Again, I'm not really sure what to think about him at the stage. Very low time on ground, which is disappointing to see in an easier matchup. Did have some CBAs. I think he had 8 or 9. So slowly getting integrated into that midfield, but again, just wasn't there on the weekend. So would be a braver coach to jump on him right now. I still probably want to see a bit more from him. Again, probably could jump on him after his bye potentially, but still decent run in the next 2 games up until the bye. So anyone that did jump on him, I wouldn't be jumping off. It's just a hold and wait and see how he goes. So yeah, wait and see on that one for me. I think another option a lot of people looked at last week was a CJ, a Jaff. He put up an absolute stinker, and I tried to warn people off this as much. I don't even know how to spell his name. Jaff. Got to embarrass myself. Am I? How do I spell it? There we go. I know it was like that somehow. But he obviously put up a 34 on the weekend, off the back of 2 tons. And as I said, his role just gets fluctuated so quickly, and he's a bit of a whipping boy sometimes. So not gonna trust him with any sort of consistency. So disappointing for those that did jump on him there, but still make 22k. So not the worst thing in the world, but the score on field definitely would have hurt. But a couple of different options that I'm looking at, if you really want to get creative this week, was maybe an O'Driscoll. If he does come back this week, definitely could be a bit of an option. We obviously saw what he was doing to start the season. Still has quite a low break even. Up against Port Adelaide is a bit tougher, but Port Adelaide also not the Port Adelaide of old at the moment with some poor performances. So I wouldn't absolutely write off him as a 1 week straight in sort of option if you're really struggling and you want get a bit creative and you're not happy with the premium options. Maybe you're too worried about the likes of a Warner, for example. The other one, which also went well on the weekend, was a McKercher. His role looks like he's changed slightly. Just sort of roaming around the ground, pushing into stoppages a much more, which you can see is evident with the high amount of tackles. So that could mean some pretty decent things for him. I think he did take a couple kick-ins as well from memory. I didn't actually check on this, but I swear I saw him back there at some stage. So I wouldn't be surprised to see if his roles improve slightly, but rather than half forward. But again, that could be temporary with the likes of Sheasel playing there this week. So again, all these players are super risky, but it's just something that you could consider if you're struggling for cash and maybe you're wanting to make a few more creative moves. And these guys are potential options that I'm looking at myself. So yeah, don't mind him. The only other option I sort of considered was maybe a Sarong. Is he getting back into some form over the last couple of weeks? 91 and a 108 on the weekend. Again, that 108 was half a game being tagged. I think the tag started on a Brayshaw and then got flicked over to Sarong afterwards. So he would have slowed down a fair bit. Still gets plenty of disposals, just none of the other extra stuff for the tackles and marks, which is frustrating. Round 13 bye is pretty handy, so that's where I could lean to a Sarong over the likes of Holmes. But I don't know. I just feel like Holmes is safer in terms of he's a keeper for the rest of the year because he's more than likely going to be top 6 and top of his line back there, whereas a Sarong is nowhere near top 8 midfielder at this stage. So I'm probably leaning to what I'm doing at the moment, just going with the cheaper guys. Holmes isn't a great matchup this week. Obviously, Western Bulldogs is tough. But 95 break even. Hopefully gets close to that. Doesn't drop too much more money. But then his run really opens up after that till his bye with West Coast Suns, Essendon, and Brisbane Lions, and even after that, Richmond, St Kilda, North after the bye is pretty decent as well. So definitely, if you don't pick them up this week, then definitely it's probably a decent one to jump on next week, which I said last week as well. So yeah, I think I'm happy to jump on him 1 week early. But I've been talking and rambling way too much about my team. I will leave it there. But yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed. Please leave a like, subscribe, do all those good things. Hopefully you had a better week than what I had. Yeah, and fingers crossed you're all ready for the buys that are going to be happening next weekend. So yeah, fingers crossed for all that. But besides that, I'll catch you guys for trade mode later this week. Enjoy, guys. Cheers.